The afternoon sun filtered through the oak leaves, creating dappled patterns on the weathered park bench where Agatha Penny Whistle sat with her book. At 78, she had developed a routine as precise as the card catalogs she had maintained during her 43 years as head librarian at Millfield Public Library. Every Tuesday and Thursday, weather permitting, she would occupy this same bench, open her current reading selection, and lose herself in knowledge for exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes. Today's selection was Theoretical Xenobiology, Possibilities Beyond Earth's Taxonomy, a dense academic text that had been a gift from her late husband, Herbert. Though he had passed away 3 years ago, Agatha maintained their shared intellectual pursuits with the same rigor they had enjoyed throughout their 52 years of marriage. Nonsense. Really, she muttered to herself, adjusting her silver-framed reading glasses. But Herbert always did enjoy a good scientific speculation. The pages were filled with hypotheses about potential biological structures that might evolve under different atmospheric conditions, gravitational forces, and chemical compositions. Herbert had been fascinated by such theories, often staying up late into the night scribbling notes in the margins of similar texts. Agatha found comfort in reading the same books he had loved, though she approached them with a more skeptical eye. She was deep into a chapter about silicon-based life forms when she felt a strange warmth near her ankle. Dismissing it as a sunbeam that had broken through the canopy, she continued reading. But the warmth intensified, accompanied by an odd chittering sound. "Squirrels," she muttered, not looking up from her page, "always begging for crumbs." The chittering grew louder, more insistent, and was joined by a soft hissing noise that finally drew Agatha's attention away from her book. She looked down, expecting to see a particularly bold squirrel. Instead, she found herself staring into the golden eyes of a creature that could only be described as a dragon, no larger than a house cat. Its scales gleamed emerald in the sunlight, and wisps of smoke curled from its nostrils. Agatha blinked hard. "Well," she said firmly to herself, "this is what comes of reading theoretical biology at my age. Visual hallucinations." Herbert would have been fascinated. She returned to her book, determined to ignore the product of her imagination. But the emerald dragon was persistent. It placed one tiny clawed foot on the edge of her page and chirped. "Shoo," Agatha said, waving her hand dismissively. "I'm not in the habit of entertaining figments of my imagination." The dragon responded by exhaling a tiny jet of flame that singed the corner of her page. "Now see here," Agatha exclaimed, genuinely alarmed. Hallucinations didn't burn books. She closed the volume with a snap and took a proper look at the creature before her. The emerald dragon was not alone. Gathered around the bench were 4 more miniature dragons, each a different color: amethyst, sapphire, russet, and turquoise. They all watched her with intelligent eyes, their tails swishing in what appeared to be anticipation. "I suppose you're all real, then," Agatha said, feeling strangely calm despite the extraordinary situation. Years of dealing with library patrons had given her an almost supernatural ability to maintain composure. "What do you want? I haven't any food." The emerald dragon chirped again and nudged her book with its snout. "My book? You want my book?" Agatha held it up, and all 5 dragons bobbed their heads in unison. "Well, I hardly think xenobiology is appropriate reading material for whatever you are." The dragons exchanged glances, and the amethyst one made a series of complicated gestures with its front claws. It then pointed at Agatha, then at the book, and finally at a specific page. "You want me to read something specific?" Agatha asked, skepticism giving way to curiosity. When the dragons nodded again, She sighed and reopened the book. Very well. But I warn you, the prose is rather dry. The emerald dragon hopped onto the bench beside her and used its tail to flip through the pages until it stopped at a diagram labeled Theoretical Interdimensional Biosphere Intersections. Agatha had skimmed this section earlier, finding it too speculative even for Herbert's tastes. This, you're interested in interdimensional theory? Agatha raised an eyebrow. I should have expected as much from dragons. She began to read aloud, and as she did, the dragons gathered closer, their eyes gleaming with an almost reverent attention. The passage described how certain thin places might exist where different dimensional realities could overlap, allowing for biological exchange between worlds. As she read, Agatha noticed something odd. Certain phrases seemed to stand out from the page, almost glowing with a subtle luminescence that she initially attributed to the shifting sunlight. But when she looked more closely, she realized that some of the words were changing as she read them, rearranging themselves into a message that hadn't been there before. Guardian of the Gateway, Reader of the Truth, Protector of the Scales, Whistle's Legacy calls. Agatha stopped reading abruptly. Whistle's Legacy? That was Herbert's nickname for his research. How could that possibly be in this book? The dragons chittered excitedly, and the sapphire one made a sweeping gesture with its wings. I don't understand, Agatha said firmly. Herbert was a theoretical physicist. He dabbled in biology as a hobby, but his work was primarily on quantum entanglement and her voice trailed off as she recalled Herbert's final project, the one he had been working on in secret, the one he had refused to discuss even with her. He had only mentioned that it involved doorways and responsibilities, and that someday she might need to finish what he started. The russet dragon approached cautiously and placed a small object on the bench between them. It was a key. Antique brass with an unusual pattern of notches and a handle shaped like a dragon's wing. This was Herbert's, Agatha whispered, recognizing it immediately. He kept it on his keychain until the day he died. I thought it was lost. The dragons nodded in unison, and the turquoise one pointed insistently at the book, then at Agatha, then at the key. You're saying there is a connection between Herbert's research, this key, and you? Agatha felt a mixture of disbelief and a strange sense of inevitability. That's preposterous. Herbert was a scientist, not a dragon wrangler. The emerald dragon made a sound that could only be described as a laugh, then nudged the key closer to Agatha's hand. With a sigh that belied her growing curiosity, Agatha picked up the key. It felt warm in her palm, almost vibrating with energy. What am I supposed to do with this? There's no lock. The amethyst dragon fluttered up to the book and pointed at the diagram, specifically at a small illustration of a door at the intersection of two overlapping circles. A door, Agatha murmured. Herbert was researching interdimensional doorways. That's not possible. But even as she said it, memories began to surface. Herbert's late-night absences explained as field research, the strange equipment she'd occasionally glimpsed in his campus laboratory, the collection of ancient texts on mythology and dimensional theory that he'd accumulated in their home library. And most tellingly, his final words to her, when they come to you, Aggie, don't be afraid. They chose you long before they chose me. She had attributed his cryptic statement to the morphine they had given him for the pain. He knew, Agatha said softly. He knew about you. The dragons nodded solemnly. But why me? I'm just a librarian. The emerald dragon chittered and gestured to the book, the key, and then to Agatha's heart. Chia, because I was his wife? Because I shared his life? more chittering, more gestures. Because I can read, because I understand. Patterns? The dragons grew excited, nodding and fluttering their wings. And what exactly am I supposed to do as this, guardian? The sapphire dragon pointed at the diagram again, then made a series of gestures that mimicked closing and locking a door. Keep the doorways closed? Agatha guessed. Prevent. What? Interdimensional invasions? That's absurd. The russet dragon made a low, warning sound and shook its head. Not invasions. Balance. Agatha was surprising herself with how quickly she was adapting to dragon charades. Maintain the balance between dimensions? The dragons nodded enthusiastically. Agatha stood up, suddenly feeling the weight of her 78 years. This is completely ridiculous. I'm a retired librarian, not some interdimensional gatekeeper. I organize books, not realities. But even as she protested, she knew she was already accepting this strange new reality. Herbert had always said she had the most orderly mind he'd ever encountered, capable of sorting and categorizing anything from ancient Sumerian pottery fragments to quantum probability matrices, if someone needed to maintain interdimensional order. Perhaps a librarian wasn't the worst choice. I suppose I should take you home, she said, finally. We can't very well discuss interdimensional politics in the middle of a public park. The dragons exchanged pleased glances and, to Agatha's astonishment, the Emerald One climbed onto her shoulder while the others arranged themselves in her large handbag. Well, she said, straightening her cardigan, this will certainly be more interesting than my usual Tuesday. Agatha's flat was a modest two-bedroom affair in a quiet neighborhood not far from the university where Herbert had taught. The living room walls were lined with bookshelves, meticulously organized by subject and author. The furniture was comfortable but worn, chosen for functionality rather than style. It was, in every respect, the home of an academic couple who valued knowledge over appearances. The dragons immediately made themselves at home, exploring the bookshelves with evident delight. The Emerald One, whom Agatha had mentally dubbed Emerald for simplicity's sake, seemed particularly interested in Herbert's study. Yes, that was his room, Agatha said, following the little dragon. I haven't changed anything since he passed. The study was smaller than the living room, with a large oak desk dominating the space. More bookshelves lined the walls, these filled with physics texts, mathematical journals, and the mythology books Herbert had collected in his later years. A worn leather chair sat behind the desk, and a chalkboard covered one wall, still bearing the faint ghosts of equations despite Agatha's attempt to clean it. Emerald flew to the desk and began scratching at a particular drawer. That's locked, Agatha informed him, and I don't have the key. Herbert kept some of his work private, even from me. The dragon chirped insistently and pointed at the brass key still clutched in Agatha's hand. This? You think this opens that drawer? Agatha approached the desk skeptically. I tried all of Herbert's keys after he died. None of them fit. Nevertheless, she inserted the dragon-winged key into the lock. It slid in perfectly, and with a smooth turn, the drawer unlocked with a soft click. Well, Agatha said, genuinely surprised. That's unexpected. Inside the drawer was a single leather-bound journal, its cover embossed with the same overlapping circles she had seen in the xenobiology book's diagram. Next to it lay a small device that resembled a compass, but instead of a magnetic needle, it contained a floating crystal that glowed with a soft blue light. What on earth? Agatha murmured. Lifting the journal, the pages were filled with Herbert's precise handwriting, detailing his research into what he called interdimensional nexus points, locations where the barriers between dimensions were thinnest and could be traversed under specific conditions. According to Herbert's notes, he had discovered one such nexus point beneath the university's physics building, in an abandoned section of maintenance tunnels. He had been monitoring it for years, documenting the periodic appearances of small interdimensional travelers, the dragons. Agatha realized, and recording the fluctuations in the dimensional barrier. Most alarmingly, Herbert had noted increasing instability in the nexus. His final entries expressed concern that someone else had discovered the nexus and was attempting to force it open wider, potentially destabilizing the dimensional boundaries permanently. This is real," Agatha said, looking up at the 5 dragons who had gathered around her. "Herbert really was researching interdimensional doorways. And you really are from another dimension." The dragons nodded solemnly. "And someone is trying to force open this doorway? For what purpose?" The russet dragon made a series of gestures that mimicked explosions and destruction. "Weapons?" Agatha guessed. "They want to weaponize interdimensional technology." More nods. "Who would even know about this?" Agatha flipped through the journal, stopping at a page where Herbert had listed his colleagues. One name was circled repeatedly: Dr. Evelyn Blackwood, Department of Applied Physics. "Blackwood," Agatha muttered. Herbert mentioned her. "She specializes in energy applications, particularly military applications." She looked up at the dragons. "You think she's the one?" The turquoise dragon nodded vigorously. "And what exactly am I supposed to do about it? Call the police?" "Hello, officer. I'd like to report an interdimensional breach being conducted by a university physicist." "Yes. My sources are 5 miniature dragons who communicate through charades." "I'm sure that would go over splendidly." Emerald chirped and pointed at the compass-like device. What is it?" The amethyst dragon fluttered over to Herbert's journal and nudged it open to a page describing the Nexus Locator, a device designed to track fluctuations in the dimensional barrier and locate active nexus points. "So this will lead me to the doorway," Agatha said, picking up the device. The crystal shifted, pointing steadily in the direction of the university. "And then what? What am I supposed to do when I find it?" The sapphire dragon mimed turning a key in a lock. "Close it? Lock it? With what?" "This key." Agatha held up the brass key. "It can't be that simple." The dragons exchanged glances, and Emerald made a series of complicated gestures that Agatha couldn't interpret. "I'm sorry, but dragon charades can only convey so much information," she said dryly. "Perhaps there's something else in Herbert's notes?" She continued reading through the journal until she found a section titled Nexus Closure Protocol. Herbert had detailed a process involving the Nexus Locator, the key, and what he called the Guardian's intent, a focused mental effort to reinforce the dimensional boundaries. "This sounds like mysticism, not science," Agatha complained. Herbert was always so rational. The russet dragon made a gesture that seemed to combine both concepts. "You're saying the distinction between science and magic is arbitrary at interdimensional levels?" Agatha raised an eyebrow. Herbert would have loved that idea. According to the journal, the nexus beneath the university had been stable for decades until recent energy experiments, presumably Blackwood's, had begun to destabilize it. Herbert had been monitoring the situation and attempting to develop a permanent closure mechanism when his illness had overtaken him. "So he left this responsibility to me," Agatha murmured. "His backup plan." The dragons nodded. "Well," Agatha said, closing the journal with a decisive snap, "I suppose I'd better get to it. Then, dragons or no dragons, I won't have someone endangering the university, or the dimensional balance, for that matter, with Herbert's research. She looked at her watch. It's nearly 5 o'clock. The physics building should be mostly empty by now, except for a few graduate students. Can you all, I don't know, make yourselves less conspicuous? I can't very well walk onto campus with dragons perched on my shoulders. Emerald chittered something that sounded suspiciously like laughter. Then all 5 dragons shimmered slightly and transformed. Where moments before there had been miniature dragons, there were now what appeared to be colorful origami dragons, perfectly still and seemingly made of paper. Well, Agatha said, impressed despite herself. That's certainly convenient. She gathered the origami dragons, the journal, the nexus locator, and the key into her handbag. After a moment's hesitation, she also took her xenobiology book. It had started this strange adventure. It seemed only fitting that it should accompany her. Right, she said, straightening her cardigan once more. Let's go close an interdimensional portal. Just another Tuesday in the life of Agatha Penny Whistle. The university campus was quiet in the early evening, with only a few students crossing the manicured lawns or huddled on benches with their textbooks. Agatha walked purposefully toward the physics building, a route she had taken countless times during Herbert's tenure. The security guard at the entrance recognized her and waved her through with a friendly nod. Evening, Mrs. Whistle. Coming to visit the old department? Just picking up a few of Herbert's things, Agatha replied smoothly. Dean Harrington finally cleared out that storage closet they've been using since the renovation. About time. The guard chuckled. Been what, 3 years now? 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days. Agatha confirmed. But who's counting? Once inside, she consulted the nexus locator. The crystal had begun to pulse with a stronger light and was pointing downward, toward the basement levels. According to Herbert's notes, the maintenance tunnels could be accessed through a service door near the old cyclotron laboratory. Agatha made her way down the deserted hallways, her sensible shoes making little noise on the polished floors. The physics building had been renovated several times since Herbert had first joined the faculty, but the basement level remained largely unchanged, a warren of storage rooms, mechanical spaces, and outdated laboratories that had been grandfathered into each new floor plan. The service door was exactly where Herbert had described it, partially hidden behind a stack of ancient filing cabinets. It was marked, "Authorized personnel only," but the lock was a simple one that yielded easily to a hairpin from Agatha's bun, a skill she had acquired during her youth and never seen fit to mention to Herbert. One does pick up the oddest skills in college, she murmured to her handbag, where she imagined the dragons were listening with interest. Beyond the door lay a narrow staircase that descended into darkness. Agatha found the light switch, illuminating a series of bare bulbs that cast harsh shadows on the concrete walls. The stairs led down to a maintenance tunnel, its ceiling lined with pipes and conduits, its floor dusty with disuse. The nexus locator was pulsing more rapidly now, the crystal glowing brightly enough to cast its own blue light. Agatha followed its direction, moving deeper into the tunnel system. The air grew cooler and damper, and the institutional sounds of the university faded away, replaced by the occasional drip of water and the distant hum of machinery. After several minutes of walking, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber that must have been part of the original foundation. The ceiling was higher here, supported by thick concrete pillars. Ancient electrical panels lined one wall, and a network of pipes ran along the ceiling before disappearing into the surrounding tunnels. In the center of the room stood what could only be described as a doorframe, though it was like no door Agatha had ever seen. Made of a dark metal that seemed to absorb rather than reflect the light. It was inscribed with symbols that reminded Agatha of the equations on Herbert's chalkboard, but more fluid, more organic. The space within the frame shimmered slightly, like heat rising from asphalt on a summer day. The Nexus locator was vibrating in Agatha's hand, the crystal spinning rapidly as it pointed directly at the doorframe. "Yeah, this is it," Agatha whispered. "The Nexus point." A soft chittering came from her handbag, and she opened it to find the dragons had reverted to their true forms, their tiny heads poking out to view the doorframe with evident concern. "Yes, I see it." Agatha told them, "Now, according to Herbert's notes, I need to use the key to lock it properly. But first, I need to— Mrs. Whistle." A cool voice interrupted from the shadows. "How unexpected to find you here." Agatha turned to see a woman stepping into the dim light. She was perhaps 50, with sharp features and silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a white lab coat over a charcoal suit, and her expression was one of calculated interest. "Dr. Blackwood," Agatha replied, instinctively closing her handbag to hide the dragons. "I might say the same about you." "Oh, I think you know exactly why I'm here," Blackwood said, moving closer to the doorframe. "Just as I suspect you know why you're here. Herbert's contingency plan, I presume." "I don't know what you're talking about," Agatha said firmly. "I was simply collecting some of Herbert's old research materials." "In a maintenance tunnel? How resourceful of you." Blackwood's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Herbert always did underestimate you. You know, he thought you were safely ignorant of his real work, content with your books and your cataloging systems." "Herbert never underestimated me," Agatha said. "He simply respected my boundaries, as I respected his." "How charmingly old-fashioned." Blackwood gestured to the doorframe. "But I'm afraid your presence here complicates matters. I've invested too much in this project to allow interference at this stage." "Project?" Agatha repeated. "Is that what you call destabilizing the dimensional barrier? A project?" Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "So he did tell you?" "Enough," Agatha said, gripping the Nexus locator tightly. "Enough to know that what you're doing is dangerous and potentially catastrophic." "Catastrophic? Hardly," Blackwood scoffed. "We're on the verge of the greatest breakthrough in human history. Think of it, Agatha, direct access to other dimensions, other realities with resources and technologies beyond our imagining. The applications are limitless. And who controls these applications? The military? Corporations? You?" Agatha shook her head. "Herbert understood the risks. That's why he was working to stabilize and eventually close the Nexus, not exploit it. Herbert was a coward." Blackwood snapped. "He discovered a doorway to other worlds and wanted to lock it forever. Such a waste of potential." "It wasn't his door to open," Agatha said quietly. "Some boundaries exist for a reason." From her handbag came an insistent chittering. Blackwood's eyes widened as Emerald's head poked out, followed quickly by the others. "Though, the Guardians," she breathed. "They're real. Herbert's notes mentioned them, but I thought it was metaphorical." The dragons emerged fully from the bag, flying to position themselves between Agatha and the doorframe. Their tiny forms seemed to grow more substantial in proximity to the Nexus, their colors more vivid, their presence more imposing despite their small size. "Oh, they're quite real," Agatha said, feeling a surge of confidence. "And they've chosen me to finish what Herbert started." "Chosen you?" Blackwood laughed, but there was an edge of uncertainty in her voice. "What could 5 miniature lizards possibly do to stop me? I have funding, equipment, a team of researchers, and I have the key." Agatha interrupted, holding up the brass key. "The one thing Herbert never shared with you, the one component you've been missing in all your attempts to control the Nexus." Blackwood's expression hardened. "Give me that key. Mrs. Whistle, I won't ask nicely a second time. I don't respond well to threats. Dr. Blackwood, 43 years of dealing with overdue book notices taught me that much." Blackwood reached into her lab coat and withdrew a small device that resembled a remote control. "This is an electromagnetic pulse generator. One press, and every electronic device in this room will be fried, including your little compass there." Herbert's notes mentioned it was essential for the closure process. Would you like to find out if he was correct? Agatha hesitated, glancing at the dragons for guidance. They seemed unconcerned by Blackwood's threat. Their attention focused instead on the door frame, which had begun to shimmer more actively. "You're too late anyway," Blackwood continued, noticing the change in the nexus. "The automatic sequence has already begun. In approximately 3 minutes, the dimensional barrier will thin enough for full-scale access. My team is standing by to begin retrieval operations." "Retrieval of what, exactly?" Agatha demanded. Whatever we find," Blackwood said with a shrug. "Technology, resources, biological specimens. The military applications alone are worth billions." The sapphire dragon made a sound like a hiss and flew closer to the doorframe, examining the shimmering air with evident concern. "They don't want you to open it," Agatha said. "They're the guardians of the gateway. They've been monitoring it for centuries, maintaining the balance between dimensions." "Charming folklore," Blackwood said dismissively. "But I deal in science, not fairy tales. Herbert always said the distinction was arbitrary at certain levels," Agatha replied, moving closer to the doorframe. The dragons flanked her, their tiny wings beating in unison, creating a strange harmonic sound that seemed to resonate with the shimmering air. "Step away from the nexus, Mrs. Whistle," Blackwood warned, raising the pulse generator. "I won't allow interference at this critical stage." Agatha ignored her, focusing instead on the nexus locator in her hand. The crystal was spinning so rapidly now that it appeared as a solid blue disk. According to Herbert's notes, this indicated maximum instability in the dimensional barrier. The dragons were chittering urgently now, gesturing for Agatha to approach the doorframe. She stepped forward, feeling a strange resistance in the air, as if she were walking against a gentle current. "I'm warning you," Blackwood called, her voice tight with anger and something else, fear. Agatha realized, fear that her plans were about to unravel. The emerald dragon flew to Agatha's shoulder and nudged her ear, then pointed at the key in her hand and then at what appeared to be a keyhole in the center of the doorframe, a detail she hadn't noticed before. "The lock," Agatha murmured. "Of course." She moved toward the doorframe. Key extended. Behind her. She heard Blackwood's frustrated cry and the click of a button being pressed. A high-pitched whine filled the room, and the lights flickered momentarily. But the nexus locator continued to glow, unaffected by the electromagnetic pulse. "Impossible!" Blackwood gasped. "That should have disabled all electronics." "Herbert's device isn't electronic," Agatha explained calmly. "It's crystalline, interdimensional. Your science doesn't apply." Before Blackwood could respond, Agatha reached the doorframe and inserted the key into the lock. It fit perfectly, and as she turned it, the shimmering air within the frame began to solidify and darken. "No!" Blackwood rushed forward, but the dragons intercepted her, their tiny forms suddenly wreathed in flames that cast long, imposing shadows on the concrete walls. The effect was startling. 5 small creatures projecting the shadows of much larger, more fearsome dragons. Agatha focused on the key, remembering Herbert's notes about the Guardian's intent. She visualized the dimensional barrier strengthening, the nexus point stabilizing, the doorway closing permanently. As she did, the key seemed to grow warm in her hand, almost hot, and the air around the doorframe rippled with energy. The shimmering within the frame condensed into a swirling vortex of color and light, then contracted rapidly to a single point before disappearing entirely. The metal of the doorframe itself began to change, the dark material becoming lighter, more ordinary, until it resembled nothing more unusual than an old picture frame. A shock wave of energy pulsed outward from the frame, knocking both Agatha and Blackwood off their feet. The dragons maintained their positions, seemingly unaffected by the dimensional disturbance. When Agatha regained her footing, she found that the key had fused with the lock, becoming a permanent part of the doorframe. The nexus locator had gone dark, the crystal now clear and motionless. "What have you done?" Blackwood demanded, struggling to her feet. "Years of research, millions in funding." "I've protected the balance," Agatha said simply. As Herbert intended. The dragons chittered approvingly and flew to surround Agatha, their tiny forms glowing with an inner light that cast a warm, golden aura around her. This isn't over," Blackwood warned, backing toward the tunnel entrance. "There are other nexus points, other doorways. Herbert's research points to at least 7 worldwide. And there are other guardians," Agatha replied, with more confidence than she felt. "You're not the only one seeking these doorways, Dr. Blackwood, nor am I the only one chosen to protect them." Blackwood's eyes narrowed as she assessed Agatha's words and the dragons circling her head. "You've made a powerful enemy today, Mrs. Whistle." "I've made many enemies over the years, Dr. Blackwood. You'd be surprised how vindictive people can be about overdue book fines. I'll manage." With a final glare, Blackwood disappeared into the tunnel, her footsteps echoing until they faded into silence. Agatha turned to the dragons, who had settled on her shoulders and in her hands. "Well, that was certainly more excitement than I've had since the library board tried to remove Catcher in the Rye from the young adult section." The emerald dragon chirped what sounded like a laugh, and the others joined in, creating a harmonious chiming sound that echoed pleasantly in the concrete chamber. "I suppose this means I'm officially your... what? Guardian? Protector?" Agatha shook her head in bemusement. "At my age, most women my age are joining book clubs and taking pottery classes, not locking interdimensional portals." The amethyst dragon made a series of gestures that Agatha was beginning to interpret as formal or ceremonial. "There's more to this than just closing the doorway, isn't there?" she asked, suddenly tired. Blackwood mentioned other nexus points. Herbert's research suggests the same. The dragons nodded solemnly. "And you expect me to... what? Travel the world closing interdimensional portals? I'm 78 years old. For heaven's sake, I get winded climbing the stairs to my flat." The sapphire dragon shook its head and pointed at Herbert's journal, which had fallen open during the commotion. Agatha picked it up and saw a page she hadn't noticed before, titled The Guardian Network. According to Herbert's notes, the role of Guardian did not necessarily involve direct action at every nexus point. Rather, it required coordination and knowledge sharing among a distributed network of individuals who had been chosen by the interdimensional guardians, the dragons, to protect specific locations. The nexus beneath the university had been Herbert's responsibility. Now it was hers. "So I'm more of a librarian of interdimensional knowledge?" Agatha asked. "That seems more manageable." The russet dragon nodded enthusiastically. "And these other guardians, how do I contact them?" The turquoise dragon flew to Herbert's journal and flipped to a page containing a list of names and locations. Agatha recognized some of them as Herbert's international colleagues, but others were unfamiliar. "Herbert was part of this network all along," she murmured. "All those international conferences, those sabbaticals. He wasn't just teaching physics." The dragons nodded again. "Well," Agatha said, closing the journal with a decisive snap, "I suppose I'd better get started. Then, I have a great deal of catching up to do if I'm to be of any use to this." Guardian Network. The emerald dragon chirped approvingly and settled more comfortably on her shoulder, as if planning to stay. "And I suppose you'll all be helping me?" Agatha asked, looking at each dragon in turn. They nodded in unison, their expressions, if dragons could be said to have expressions, conveying a mixture of determination and what Agatha could only interpret as affection. "Very well, then," she said, gathering her things. "Let's go home. I believe we have work to do." As they made their way back through the tunnels and up to the main campus, Agatha found herself planning her next steps with the same methodical approach she had applied to library management. She would need to organize Herbert's research, establish contact with the other guardians, monitor for any further activities from Blackwood or her associates, and, perhaps most challengingly, find a way to accommodate 5 miniature dragons in her modest flat. "I'll need to get you proper perches," she told them as they walked across the darkening campus. "And I suppose you eat something other than chicken feed? We'll have to work out the details." The dragons chittered among themselves, apparently discussing the arrangements with enthusiasm. By the time they reached Agatha's flat, night had fallen completely. She unlocked her door, switched on the lights, and set down her handbag with a sigh of relief. "Tea, I think," she announced, "and then we can begin properly." As she moved toward the kitchen, the dragons flew to the center of the living room and arranged themselves in a circle. Their colors began to glow more intensely, creating a rainbow of light that spiraled upward to form a shimmering crown above Agatha's head. "What on earth?" she exclaimed, feeling a strange warmth spreading through her body, as if her blood had been replaced with sunlight. The crown of light descended slowly until it hovered just above her silver hair, casting her ordinary living room in an otherworldly glow. The dragons chittered in what sounded like a formal incantation, their voices blending into a single, resonant tone. "Is this some sort of coronation?" Agatha asked, half amused, half awestruck. The emerald dragon nodded solemnly. "I see," Agatha said, straightening her posture. "Well, if I'm to be crowned the Queen of Interdimensional Dragons at the age of 78, I suppose I should accept with dignity." She inclined her head slightly, and the crown of light settled fully onto her brow, then seemed to dissolve into her skin, leaving behind a momentary tingling sensation and a faint, residual glow that gradually faded. "There," she said, adjusting her cardigan. "Now that the formalities are out of the way, shall we have that tea? I find even interdimensional diplomacy goes better with a good cup of Earl Grey." The dragons chattered approvingly and followed her into the kitchen, where Agatha Penny Whistle, retired librarian and newly crowned guardian of the interdimensional gateway, put the kettle on and began the first evening of her unexpected new career. In the months that followed, Agatha established a new routine as precise as her old one, but considerably more unusual. Mornings were devoted to correspondence with the Guardian Network, conducted through a secure system Herbert had established before his death. Afternoons were spent studying the interdimensional sciences, with the dragons as her patient tutors. Evenings were for monitoring the now dormant nexus beneath the university, ensuring that Blackwood or others like her did not attempt to reactivate it. The dragons, whom she had finally named Emerald, Amethyst, Sapphire, Russet, and turquoise. Exactly as she had initially thought of them, had become not just her guides, but her companions. They accompanied her everywhere, usually disguised as origami decorations or, when necessary, as colorful brooches on her cardigan. Dr. Blackwood had disappeared from the university shortly after their confrontation, reportedly taking a position with a private research firm specializing in alternative energy sources. Agatha monitored her activities through the Guardian network, but so far, there had been no further attempts to access the Nexus. Life as an interdimensional Guardian had proven less physically demanding than Agatha had feared, but more intellectually challenging than she had imagined. The blend of science and what could only be described as magic required her to expand her thinking beyond the orderly systems she had always relied upon. Yet, in many ways, it was the perfect role for her, cataloging knowledge, organizing information, maintaining balance and order, just on a cosmic rather than a literary scale. On a crisp autumn morning, almost exactly a year after the dragons had first appeared to her in the park, Agatha sat at her desk reviewing reports from a guardian in New Zealand who had identified unusual energy fluctuations near an ancient geothermal site. Emerald perched on her shoulder, occasionally offering chirped commentary on the findings. "Yes, I see the pattern," Agatha murmured, tracing the energy graph with her finger. "It's similar to what Herbert documented before the Nexus became unstable. We should alert the local guardian immediately." A soft knock at her door interrupted her analysis. The dragons immediately transformed into their origami forms, settling innocuously among the books and papers on her desk. Agatha answered the door to find a young woman with bright eyes and a nervous smile, clutching a familiar-looking book. "Theoretical Xenobiology, Possibilities Beyond Earth's Taxonomy." "Mrs. Whistle?" the young woman asked. "My name is Lily Chen. I was a student of your husband's before he passed. He left this book for me in his will, but it was only delivered to me recently. There's a note inside suggesting I should speak with you about some unusual observations I've been making in my research." Agatha felt Emerald shift slightly on her shoulder, now disguised as a colorful scarf. She smiled at the young woman, recognizing the beginning of a familiar pattern. "Yes, Miss Chen," she said, opening the door wider. "I believe we have quite a lot to discuss. Would you care for some tea? I find even interdimensional diplomacy goes better with a good cup of Earl Grey." The young woman's eyes widened in surprise, then understanding, and she stepped into Agatha's flat. Behind her, unnoticed, a tiny dragon with scales the color of sunset peeked out from her backpack, caught Emerald's eye, and winked. The circle of guardians was growing, the balance maintained, the doorways secured, and Agatha Penny Whistle, retired librarian and interdimensional queen, would ensure it remained so for as long as she was needed.